Hello. Giving everyone a moment to become online. We'll be getting started in just a few moments. Hello, Melissa. Glad to see you on, and I can see that we have a number of folks on. Would you give me a word if you can hear my audio, please?
We can hear you, Bob.
Okay, fantastic. Are we ready to get going?
We are ready.
Okay, thank you so much. I'd like to welcome everyone to the second webinar sponsored by the School Behavioral Health Alliance and the Behavioral Health Alliance of South Carolina. Very happy to be here. My name is Bob Stevens, and I've been working with PBIS and also with School Behavioral Health for the last 15 years. And today we're going to be talking about some of the tools that we can use to determine if we are implementing PBIS, MTSS, some of our secondary and tertiary interventions effectively. And so that's what the discussion is today. The chat is on. If you have a question, I will answer it. I'll keep checking back and looking at the chat. Happy to answer any questions as we go along. Don't hesitate to ask questions. There are going to be several things that we're going to be doing as a result of this online, so I do want you to pay close attention, particularly to any website addresses that we talk about today. Okay. And as we do with any PBIS program, we always make sure we talk about our expectations first. So here we have our expectations for today's session, and that's something we should always do when we're working with positive behavior support in a universal situation. Okay, I wanted to give this a quick look. Let me jump down here. What I'd like to do is talk about how do we stay on track when we're implementing secondary and tertiary intervention. So we have this great graphic of the train barreling down the track, because I know you all probably feel like the BASC is a train barreling down the track and we have to get control of it. So that's what we're going to do. To start out, I want to talk about the two primary forms of data that you have to be concerned with in your schools and in your school district. So if you're a district person or if you're a school person, you're always concerned about these two types of data. The folks at the University of South Carolina, as well as the State Department, are also very concerned about these two types of data. The first is that many of you are familiar with, obviously, is progress monitoring data. This is the kind of data that you would look at to see how you're doing. How many office discipline referrals have we had in our district or in our school? What kinds of referrals are they for what kinds of offenses? What is our suspension and expulsion numbers? And again, what are the kinds of offenses that we have for suspension and expulsion? You have to be very sure that we keep good data there, because what we find is different schools, different districts have different kinds of reasons for suspending and expelling students. And quite often, the community that the school is in plays a great part into what these suspensions or what suspensions and expulsions are for. So we need to keep track of that, because that's one of the ways that we address this when we look at school climate and community climate. Attendance data obviously is very important. And of course, we do a lot of surveying with our SIC councils and everything else to see what our parents and students are really thinking about the school. So we're looking at progress monitoring data. You do this all the time. And what we're looking at here is outcomes. Is what we're doing making a difference? And this is going to be the important data that you're going to look at the end of the year. But as we're going forward, we really need to see if we're implementing the things that we say we're implementing with Fidelity. Fidelity of implementation measures. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And there are several of them that we're going to talk about specifically. The first one is something called the Team Implementation Checklist. The team implementation, well, let me stop right there. First of all, we have a question that I'm going to ask Cheryl to ask everyone that we give a yes/no answer to. And that question is, how many of you are using any of the Fidelity of implementation measures? Are you doing any of these measures in your district, in your school, to see if you are implementing PBIS or MTSS with Fidelity? So Cheryl, if you could ask that question. Go ahead and click yes or no. Okay, let's go ahead and go forward. The measures that we're going to talk about today, you see some of them listed here. Here, the Team Implementation Checklist, which is called the TIC. There's a Self-Assessment Survey, which is a survey for all of the adults in your building, teachers, aides, administrators, support staff. There's something called the Tiered Fidelity Inventory. We're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail. Something called the Benchmarks of Quality, and something called the Benchmarks for Advanced Tiers. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a little bit more detail as well. If you are a PBIS school, the very first Fidelity of implementation measure that you would work with would be the Team Implementation Checklist. We're going to talk a little bit about that in more detail as well. So with this Fidelity of implementation, we're determining is the systems that we have put into place, and are we doing what we said we were going to do? And if we do those things, then we'll get great outcomes. The progress monitoring data will take care of itself. So this is why early in the school year and during the school year, we need to be very concerned about the Fidelity of implementation measures. Okay, we know, for example, in a well-implemented PBIS school that we have a multi-component process. We're concerned about primary, secondary, and tertiary levels of prevention. We know we have to do the school-wide at the primary level. We know that we have small group interventions that we use. And finally, obviously, tertiary level, we have individual interventions that we use. And we have to make sure that these things are effective or implemented properly. And as important as that is, we have to make sure that there's a connection between what we're doing universally school-wide, but then also at the secondary and tertiary level. And these instruments we're going to talk about check us and make sure we're doing that. We have to have teamwork, because PBIS, actually all components of NPSS, rely on school teams. These are not top-down initiatives. These are initiatives in which a school team really leads the process within the school. We're going to be using, obviously, this data and both outcome and fidelity data for problem solving, and these fidelity measures are an essential element. There's a place, and this is the first web address that I want you to pay attention to. There is a place where you can find all of these implementation tools, and you should go and you should look at them. The web address is on the bottom of the screen. It's www.pbisapps.org, pbisapps.org. And when you go to this page, you want to click on the tab that says PBIS Assessment. There's different things that this web address has on it, but we are interested in the PBIS Assessment. This is where all of the free tools are that you will use. And again, there are a lot of them there, and I don't want to overwhelm you, so we're just going to talk about some of the basic ones today. All right, so here are some of the surveys that are available right now. The Team Implementation Checklist, and that's the very first one that your school would use. Another one that is very important for your school to use is an anonymous self-assessment survey that you can send out to all of your faculty and staff and support staff to see how they feel about the implementation of PBIS and some of your MTSS measures. It's a very useful tool. Then there's something called the Tiered Fidelity Inventory, and this helps us learn how well we're doing our secondary and tertiary measures. There are a number of other measures here that we're not going to talk about at this time, other than to say the other one that's highlighted in blue, the benchmarks for advanced tiers, is going to be one that's very important to BAS districts and BAS schools, because this really tells us how we're doing implementing our mental health interventions, our secondary, our small group interventions that may have overtones of mental health and behavioral health, as well as our tertiary interventions as well. So the benchmarks for advanced tiers and the TFI, those two specifically look at what you're doing at the secondary and tertiary level, making sure you're doing a good job implementing these things. And here's another way of looking at these surveys. You can see that some of these are research tools, some of them are assessment tools, and some of them are progress monitoring tools. And you can see which tiers that they work at. This graph is available on the web page that I gave you, www.pbisapps.org. And it's pretty self-explanatory, but I wanted you to be able to see what was available and where you could find these. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about what I'd like to do is have Cheryl go back now and ask our second question. If you have used tools, which of these tools have you used? So Cheryl, if you could put up that second question, that would be great. And by the way, we will report these results back to you so you can see how many of your fellow schools are using these instruments. Can we have that up, Cheryl? Sorry. The question about which tools they may be using. The questions are up. Thank you. Sorry about that. I didn't see them on my screen as a host. I apologize. Thank you. All right, so let us know which of these instruments you have used in the past. We want to get a good sense of of which ones you are using. Finally, what I would like to say is to say that you can take these surveys in two ways. You can take them with paper and pencil, and you can score them yourself. And almost all of these, with the exception of the self-assessment survey, are simply filled out by your teams, and so they're pretty easy to do. You can take them on paper and pencil and score them yourself, or you can, if you have access, if you have named someone as a PBIS coordinator, we can get them access where they can input these surveys into the PBIS app system at that web address that we just showed you, and it'll draw you the graphs showing you where you need to work, what areas you need to work on, the things you are doing well, the things you are not doing well, and it's a really wonderful tool. Does not cost anything. It's part of what you get for being a PBIS school within the PASS system. But I have to have someone in each district that I can communicate with and get them a password so they can go in and use it. So one of the questions on the survey is, if you are using these tools, are you using the tools with the online version or are you using the paper and pencil version? Again, we're trying to get a sense of how many schools are using the online version. And then we're going to follow up with each of you and see if you're interested in doing it online. Then we can get someone with the password, and we're going to help you do that. Okay, Renee, I see that you're using the paper and pencil version. That's great. It may be worth, and you're going to see what some of the reports look like in a minute. It may be worth you considering using the online version. Doesn't cost anything. And it'll save a little bit of time. All we have to do is have a person from your school named as the coordinator, and we give them a password, and they can go and enter the information. Okay. And we can see some of the results here. It looks like everyone here has used the TIC, which is great. Some of them, about 25%, well, we have one person who's used the self-assessment survey, one person who's used the TFI, we have two folks that have used the SET, and one that has used benchmarks for quality. That's great. I don't see anybody having used the benchmarks for advanced tiers. That's one we can talk about, but again, the TFI would serve a similar purpose. Great. All right. Well, that gives us an idea of what we're working with here. All right. When we do these tools, when we use these tools, one of the ones that I'll tell you what, I'm going to jump forward and skip over the BAT, and we're going to come back to it and look at one of the other tools first, okay? And we'll come back to the BAT. First of all, to use the online system, I have to get a local coordinator. To get a local coordinator, we have to send their contact information to the University of Oregon, which manages this website. That's the PBIS Technical Assistance Center. And so this is the form that we use for a local coordinator. We fill this out. Cheryl will be, if you don't have this form, you can get it on the web page. And we'll also have Cheryl send this form out to everyone. And you fill it out, send it back to me, and we will get you the password where you can go in and use the online tool if you would like to use it, if you don't want to use the paper and pencil version of it. We'd like to encourage you to use the online tool because it's great data, and you can then compare yourself to other schools nationally, and it's really a good way to measuring stick for yourself. So it's one of the things we like to do, but it is not a requirement. When you do these tools, you're supposed to get 3 different kinds of reports. All of these assessments provide 3 different kinds of reports. The first one is a total score report. And this is going to become very important. At some point, we're going to want to know what your level of PBIS implementation is at your school and in your district. And so the total score will tell us that. We know that in PBIS, the most important number is 80%. We want everybody, we want 100% of kids engaged in school. We want 100% of the kids to work at their potential. But in fact, the tipping point number in PBIS, like in many systems, is 80%. We know when we look at the triangle that 80% of our students should receive universal interventions, tier 1 interventions. 15% get secondary, 5% get tertiary. Now those numbers change a little bit, but the 80% number is critical. We know that in order for PBIS to be implemented effectively in your school, that about 80% of your teachers and staff need to buy in. If they don't, then you're going to have a very hard time implementing PBIS, NPSS, or quite frankly, any intervention at all three tiers. So the tipping point is 80%. We know you're always going to have that naysayer teacher or that naysayer staff member, but if you're only at 50% buy-in, you're probably you're not going to be successful implementing PBIS. So our goal is to get 80%. So one of the things that we say is, to say that you're a PBIS school, what percentage do you think you should have on one of these measures as a total score? 80%. Yes, that's right, 80%. So when you are talking about PBIS and somebody asks you for a percentage, you should probably say 80%. If you do, you will be right at least 80% of the time. Okay, so that's my joke for today. Hopefully that got a big laugh. But 80% is a number that we go for. For example, what I like to do is have schools get an 80% on the TIC, that very first measure that we talked about, 80% implementation, and then we go forward and we look at some of the other ones. Some folks will say you can go forward at a 70% level, that's fine. But then we can go forward and use a TFI or use the benchmarks for advanced tiers or one of the others. But that's your total score. Perhaps the most important to you for making action plans are the subscale scores that you will get, which just breaks it down by area and tells you how you are implementing specific areas. And then finally, you can go back and you can look at specific individual scores. So that's why these tools are so important, because it allows you to see at different levels, total score, drill down to subscales, and then look at individual items to see how you are doing. It's a great drill down report. So for example, in the benchmarks for advanced tiers, it will tell you how well you're implementing your foundations, how well you're implementing your tier 2 interventions, and how well you're implementing your tier 3 interventions. So these are a score report that was done for a Charleston County school, and you can see that school-wide they're only implementing at about a 70%, but at tier 2 they're implementing at a 75%, and actually, tertiary interventions are intervening a little bit over 80%. That's not unusual. We know because of special ed, sometimes we're very effective at our tertiary interventions when we're not as effective at the universal or secondary level. Other schools you go to, they spend a lot of time universally with PBIS initiatives. They tend to do much better, and maybe secondary and tertiary is low. Interestingly enough, in South Carolina, generally the tier that scores the lowest is the secondary tier. Schools will spend a lot of time universally, they'll spend a lot of time tertiary in the tertiary area, but they don't do as good a job implementing at the secondary level. And usually that's because they don't do as good a job determining outcomes, doing analysis of progress monitoring, and so on and so forth at the secondary level. So one of my things that I always advise schools is really look at your secondary tier interventions to make sure that you're doing the things you need to do. Then you can obviously look at subscale scores that we talked about. So in this case, it's telling us how are we implementing PBIS. We're at the 80%. What is our commitment? This school didn't have a great commitment. How well did they do with the monitoring and evaluation? A little bit less. Secondary, what kind of secondary systems did they have? What kind of strategies in their implementation? How were they doing implementing the secondary interventions? How did they do a good job monitoring and evaluating? So you can see the kind of reports you would get with all of these reports, the TIC, the TFI, the subscale score, and so forth. The beauty of these is this helps us create action plans. By using these tools, just using the tool and looking at it and admiring the data, that doesn't get us anything. What we need to do is action plan from that. And one of the problems that we quite often have in South Carolina, we're terrible about using a train and hope model. Happens to us even now. You know, I'll get a call to come to a school, come and do a presentation. Presentation's going to solve the problem. So we had a problem. We got some expert to come in and talk about it. We hired an expert to do the training. They left, and we hope that it works well. And then we turn around and wait for the next problem. This is not what PBIS and MTSS is about. We have to have ongoing action planning. We don't wait for the new problem. We go back to see if that training helped. If it didn't, where do we need to repeat it? Where did it stick? Where did it not stick? Who do we need to go back and do follow-up training with? And that's what we do with our action planning. Not a train and hope model. It's an action plan model that is ongoing. Continuous progress improvement. Okay, so in creating our action plan from these tools, we know that we have several things that we have to do. What does the data tell us we need to do? Who's going to do it? When is it going to be done? And how do we know it's accomplished? Schools who don't plan connecting framework as well, if you use your BAT, your TFI, your TIC, they all have action planning documents with them that you can use for planning purposes. Just before this webinar, I asked for Cheryl to send out to you several documents. And really, if you can, for just a moment, and I'm going to leave this up, but I would like to go back and take a minute and look at the TIC document that Cheryl sent out to you. The TIC document has 24 items that your team reviews, and you make a decision of whether you're doing these things well or not. You make the decision of whether you're doing them well or not, but attached to that TIC document, after you go through the questions, at the end of that, on the exact same document, is an action planning document. And that action planning document is one space for each of the 24 items. If you've said you are not doing something well, then there's a place for you to say, okay, we've said we're not doing this well. What are we going to do? What are we going to do about it? Who's going to be responsible for doing it, getting it done? And then how will we know that we have done it? And that's the action planning document. It's all right in one place. Most of you said you did the TIC. So my next question, we don't have this on the poll, but my next question is, when you did the TIC, did you follow that up by doing an action plan? If the answer is yes, then you will work your way to getting that 80% that we talked about. Once you get to that 80%, then you say, we're ready to do the TFI. We're ready to do the BAT. We're ready to do one of these other tools that's going to drill down even farther and get us doing even a better job. That's how this works. So we know with our action planning, we have to have goals, we have to have timelines. What are the resources we're going to use? How are we going to let people know what we're doing? Who's responsible for getting this done? How are we going to know that we've done it? And then, remembering what action planning is not train and hope, we're going to go back later and we're going to review what worked, what didn't work, where do we need to go back and reinforce, can we declare victory, do we have to go back and continue working on that? So that's where we review our status, and the process starts again on the same discussion. And here's an example of a tiered support team action plan. Your goal, your timeline, your resources, who's responsible, who's doing it. And all of these tools, the TIC, the BAT, the TFI, they all have action planning documents that go with them. Cheryl has sent them to you, so you have them in your inbox. Okay? One of the things I'd like to tell you is I did some research in South Carolina. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but when we went back and schools that created acceptable action plans, in other words, they had these items in their action plan. To be acceptable, they had these items. They had acceptable action plans. Guess what happened to their implementation score average? They went up through the roof. So we had 4 schools that created acceptable action plans, and then we followed up with them, and their implementation levels got up to 87%. We had 17 schools that did not create acceptable action plans, and they never reached that 80% magic number that we have in PBIS. And we did a follow-up on it, and you can see when we had more schools, and we had the exact same results, actually even better. So if you use good, acceptable action plans with all those parts based on these implementation tools, you will have implementation success. That's what we know. That's what we know. The TFI is the Tiered Fidelity Inventory. This is a great tool. It does this very similar to the one I just showed you. It gives you your levels of implementation level. These are graphs that come right out of the online tool. Again, you can do this by hand if you want, but if you use the online tool, it'll print graphs for you like this. This is the subscale. This particular school had not done much work with their tertiary interventions, so they only evaluated Tier 1 and Tier 2. That's fine. And you can see they were doing a great job with their teams. Their implementation was not quite as good. They had a problem with evaluating universal interventions, and that's what the report told them. And again, so they would go back and say, gee, we need to work on how we're evaluating our Tier 2 intervention. How are we evaluating the school-wide interventions that we're using? How are those interventions that our teachers are using in the classroom to keep kids in the classroom? How are they working? How are we evaluating that? Do we need to go back and do a better job checking and see? Or did we just train the teachers and then hope they were doing a good job in the classroom? So this is what can be very useful for us. And then you can go back then and follow it up. Here, for example, is a school that did it in 2013, did the TFI again in 2014, and so they could see the growth that they had. And again, these instruments are not hard to do. They're being done by your team, and by the secondary team and by the tertiary team. So it's not taking a lot of time from your faculty and your staff. It's taking some of your time. You're sitting down analyzing how well you're doing. And then here is a action planning document for the TFI. And again, how did you do? What is the action you're going to take? Who's responsible for doing it? When is it going to be done? I think some of it got cut off on this slide, but you can see what we're doing. One of the things that you see here on bullet number 3 is if you're not sure you're doing a good job at this, this is why you're part of this BASS team. Folks, Cheryl and her team and other folks will come out and help make sure that you are using these tools properly, and then they can help you with your action plan. And we'll continue to do this as a group, but we can help you individually with these things as well. I'd like to go back for a minute now and go back to the benchmarks for advanced tiers. Hold on, because I think that this is a critical one to discuss. And it really is a good example of how all of them work. So if we're going to use the BAT, and this would be the same for the TFI, the entire team discusses the statements, and the team comes to a consensus on each item. Now I'm going to give you some warning. Anytime you do this, remember that we have school administrators quite often sitting on these teams. School administrators should not be leading the team. We know that. But they're quite often school administrators on the team. And sometimes when we're discussing these measures, these implementation measures, members of the team will tend to look and see what the administrator says before they give their own answer. It might be good if you are an administrator, or if you have an administrator sitting in a meeting like you should, to ask them not to make comment and not to kind of drive the discussion until after some of the other team members have been able to express their opinion. Because we know if we ask one of these questions, for example, does one of the examples of one of the questions, do we notify parents when a child within 24 hours when a child has entered a new intervention? And the administrator might say, oh, I know that we do that, and that would have a chilling effect on everybody sitting around the table that may not want to contradict the administrator. So we want the administrators on the team. We want them sitting there because, number one, we'd like them to hear what the team says. But when you have these meetings and you're discussing these tools, ask the administrator not to comment initially, not to raise his eyebrows or her eyebrows, and let the process work properly. Kind of sit on their hands. Once there's a good discussion going on, I think it's appropriate then for the administrator to give their view. But you want to make sure that they're not cutting discussion or having a chilling effect on folks responding the way they really feel about one team member then takes the responses from all the teams and they enter them on the assessment website, or they would score it by hand and draw the graphs that way. And you can do it, as I've said, you can do it either way. Happy to help you do it either way. When you're using the benchmarks for advanced tiers, and this is also the case for the TFI, tier 1, we're seeing how well we're implementing PBIS universally. Team members agree that school-wide systems are in place. And we have data systems. The team is looking at data to make sure that we are doing those outcome data that we mentioned at the beginning of this PowerPoint. We're looking at that outcome data to make sure that we're making progress there, seeing where the problems might be. Remember the questions, the data that we want is who, what, where, when, and why. Those of you that took journalism as a class in college, those are the same questions they ask there. Good journalists ask who, what, where, when, and why. Who's doing it, when are they doing it, why they're doing it, where is it happening, and those are the questions that you want to answer, the 5 W's, when you're looking at your data. We know that we want to look at faculty commitment, student identification with tiers 2s and 3s. Quite often kids are referred to secondary and tertiary interventions for a lot of different reasons. We have to make sure that we have good processes for them. And remember also that secondary and tertiary interventions are shaping. Think about ABA, Applied Behavioral Analysis, and we should be shaping the behavior so those things will change. If one of the popular tier 2 interventions is check in, check out, and if you have kids that are in check in, check out all year long, then obviously that intervention is not shaping behavior, it's not changing behavior, so there's some problem there. You have to think about those kinds of things. And then does the student in the secondary intervention, when do they move up to a tertiary intervention? There's a lot of things going on. And then receiving support in a timely manner. Monitoring and evaluation, big part of this. Do our teachers understand who's getting tier 2 and tier 3 supports? Are they notified about the impact, what to look for? Are they reporting back? Are primary family members of students receiving information about this? Tier 2 support systems. Are tier 2 team members formally trained? If we've added, if we have a tier 2 social skills group, do the teachers that the kids are in the social skills group know what they're doing in that group, knowing what is being taught in the social skills group so the teachers can reinforce it in the classroom. And we train those teachers how to do that. Those are some of the things that are asked in this evaluation system. It tells us exactly where our shortcomings are. And then, of course, we have our tier 3, our tertiary interventions, and how do we develop PBIS and BIPs and specific plans. And again, what data we're looking at, how are we shaping it, how are we wrapping these services around. It isn't one person's responsibility. Invariably, tier 3 interventions are are quite often wraparound, so they have multi-components. Who's involved? Are they communicating with each other? Are we making sure that what we're asking them to do at a tertiary level fully agrees with the universal, the school-wide thing, so we're not conflicting with what's going on in the playground when we're giving out our acknowledgement systems there. We're being consistent with the student. There's a lot of things to think about, and these tools help us do that. These tools help us do that. Okay, and then finally monitoring and evaluation. So these are some of the kinds of things that we do. And all of these tools, not just the BAT. If you have a PBIS coordinator, you can enter the data. We saw the form for that. I'll go back to that in a minute. And then somebody enters that data and they'll draw the graph, or you can do it by hand. Again, here's the PBIS assessment form. We will make sure that Cheryl sends this out. Okay. What the schools need to be making sure they use right now is initially the team implementation checklist. If you use the online tool, you may want to use the self-assessment survey. That one you have to use online, and that's a survey that goes to all of the staff by email to everybody in your school. If you're not using the system, then you really can't do that because the system sends out the email and collects the data and so forth, but you don't have to do it. Again, that's free. The next tools that you need to use, obviously, are the tiered Fidelity inventory, because many of you are required to use that. And that looks at universal, secondary, and tertiary interventions. I think a very good tool to use specifically for secondary and tertiary interventions goes into more detail than the TFI does. If you really want to drill down, is a tool that we've been talking about here called the BAT. It stands for Benchmarks for Advanced Tiers. If you go to the PBIS website, all of these instruments, you can download a paper and pencil version of it and take a look at it. It'll also tell you about how to implement these tools. That website is www.pbisapps.org. And you click on, as it says here, the PBIS Assessment Triangle. There are other tools there. For example, the Swiss data system, and there's some other evaluation tools. You are interested in the PBIS assessment section of PBIS apps. You scroll down to the bottom of the page, it'll have all of them there. You can click on them, download all of them in either PDF or Word format or RTF format. You can use them, you can look at them, look at the items. It'll be very helpful to just having your team look at the items will help them implement PBIS and MTSS better. So even if you don't do them, but if you look at these, it'll make you familiar with what is expected of your team and what is expected of your school. I hope that you will all do the tick. Once you get a score of 80 or better on the tick, that you will go and use some of these other tools. Many of you I know have to use the TFI. That's fine, go ahead and use it. Take that one. Go to the action plans that come at the end of both the TFI and the TIC. Use those action plans to improve. You saw the research. If you action plan properly, then your level of implementation will go up significantly. I like using the survey. If you decide to go online, I'd let your faculty members do it. So it's really cool when you think you're doing a great job with your reward systems, or you think you're doing a great job with your consequence systems, but then your faculty say, not so much. Sometimes they'll bring you right down to earth. And they answer questions about the same 3 tiers on that questionnaire. It's anonymous, and the website will collect all that, and it gives you great graphs showing exactly the areas you need to use for training. So those are the things that we're doing with these forms. You want to get everybody involved. You want to get everybody using them. Start with the TIC, use the action plan, move to the TFI and the BAT for your upper tiers, use the action plan. If you want to go online, I suggest you also consider using the survey to all of your faculty and staff just to get their feedback. And if you do these things, you will have a much improved implementation for PBIS. If you do these implementation measures and look at this data, I promise you your outcome data will improve as well. And that's those other things we talked about, your suspensions, your early identification, you do a better job with getting interventions to folks before they're identified, to keep the number of interventions down, or identifications down, all of those things. So use these tools. You can contact me directly. Cheryl will give you my address. She's going to be sending out this form for a local coordinator. If you want to use the online version, we'll get you signed up. It is free. And does anybody have any questions? This has been great. Hopefully you've been able to hear me well, and it's provided some good information to you. The paper and pencil version taking place of putting TFI data in DMS. I would still, you obviously have to give that data to DMS, but if you use the online version, it is such an easier way to see the results. And so you're collecting the data anyway in your meeting, and I would go ahead and report it both to DMS, but I'd also put it in the system, simply because of the great graphs it's going to give you and help you do some planning from it. So it doesn't take the place of putting in DMS. I'd put it in both places. It doesn't take long to do. It only takes 2 minutes. So it's not something that is burdensome. Good question. Any other questions? And we're going to do 2 things. Cheryl will be sending this coordinator form out to you, and she'll also be sending out the results so we know, and again, I don't know how many people voted, but how many folks are using which tools. Thank you so much. Any other questions?
Bob, I just wanted to let people know that that this is being recorded and will be on our website for people to view later if they'd like to, or share it with others.
That's great. I will tell you that there are also the Association of Positive Behavior Support of South Carolina has a number of webinars. There's actually one tomorrow on PBIS in the classroom. Those things, I think the dates for those went out in a newsletter that Cheryl sent out. And we're also trying to work on an in-person planning. APBS will be working with you, an in-person training right after the first of the year in Columbia. So we'll keep you apprised. And then, of course, we're trying to be responsive to your needs at the April conference, the School Behavioral Health Conference in April in Myrtle Beach. If you have topics that you would like to see at that conference, please send them to us and we will make sure that we get them addressed, number one. More important, if you have done something exciting in your school or in your district, if you have done an intervention that has worked particularly well, or you have created some kind of program for students, or documents, or video, or something that is particularly good, at that conference you have the opportunity to share that with others, and we would really like for you to do that. The neat thing about it is a conference that's actually getting national reach at this point. It's regional, but it's getting national reach. And being a presenter at either a poster or an oral session at the Southeastern School Behavioral Health Conference looks very good on your curriculum vita. So we are actively asking you to share the good things that you've done in your districts and schools with us at the conference. So please get information about that and apply. We'd love to see you there doing a presentation. Poster presentations are great. They're a lot of fun. And I would really encourage you to do some of those and share what you're doing with your fellow students. Plus, it's a great little plus mark on your curriculum vita for down the road. All right. I think our time is just about up. Any other questions? I'll turn it back over to Cheryl. Thank you so much, Cheryl and Catherine.
Okay, thank you everyone for participating. I will get the form out to you and the other information that Bob mentioned. And hope you guys have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.